A millionaire is shocked to discover what his new maid is secretly doing with his 4-year-old twins. At first, he thought she was just quiet, maybe even strange. But late one night, he checks the hidden camera, and what he sees changes everything. She's not hurting them, she's healing them, through stories that sound far too personal to be coincidence. The twins start smiling again, sleeping again, dreaming again. But who is this woman really? And what is she hiding behind those fairy tales? This is a story about grief, second chances, and the quiet power of love that can rebuild a broken home, one bedtime story at a time. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Frost traced delicate patterns on the tall windows of the Hale estate's kitchen. Damien Hale stood motionless, his reflection a dark silhouette against the pale winter morning. Steam rose from the coffee cup in his hand, but he barely noticed its warmth. His attention was fixed on the dormant garden below, its bare branches and empty flower beds matching the hollow feeling in his chest. "Ms. Moreau's references check out completely, sir," Mrs. Chen, his house manager, said from behind him. Her efficient voice cut through the silence. "She'll arrive at 10 this morning." Damien nodded without turning. "And her experience?" 5 years as a private tutor in France. Excellent recommendations. Though she's been... Mrs. Chen hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Out of the workforce for the past 2 years." The clink of spoons against ceramic drew Damien's attention to the kitchen table. His sons, Rowan and Jude, sat hunched over their breakfast bowls, listlessly pushing cereal around in circles. Neither had taken a bite. The sight made his throat tighten. 2 weeks had passed since Maria, their nanny of 8 months, had left. Her resignation letter had been polite but firm. "The emotional demands are beyond what I can handle." She'd been the 3rd nanny in 18 months. "The boys need stability," Mrs. Chen said softly, following his gaze. "And frankly, sir, so do you." Damien took a slow sip of coffee, letting the bitter taste ground him. "We'll see how long this one lasts." The morning crawled by. Damien buried himself in work emails, but his attention kept drifting to the clock. At precisely 10, Mrs. Chen's knock interrupted his thoughts. "Ms. Moreau has arrived, sir." Damien stood, straightening his already perfect tie. In the foyer, a young woman waited, her posture straight but her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She wore a simple gray dress, her dark hair pulled back neatly. There was something both composed and fragile about her, like a porcelain cup that had been carefully mended. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Thank you for this opportunity." "Ms. Moreau," he nodded curtly. "Mrs. Chen will show you to your room and then introduce you to the boys. I trust you've reviewed the schedule we sent." "Yes, sir, and please, call me Lena." He didn't acknowledge the invitation to informality. "Mrs. Chen will handle any questions or concerns you have. I'll be in my study if there are any immediate issues." Damien retreated to his office, but left the door slightly ajar. He could hear Mrs. Chen's footsteps leading Lena upstairs, then returning down several minutes later. The house fell quiet again until the sound of small feet shuffling along the hallway announced the twins' approach. "Boys," Mrs. Chen's voice drifted in. "This is Ms. Moreau. She'll be taking care of you from now on." Damien moved closer to the door, listening intently. "Hello, Rowan, Jude." Lena's voice was gentle, with just a hint of a French accent. "I'm very happy to meet you both." Silence followed. Damien could picture his sons' faces, Rowan's careful, assessing look, Jude's barely contained nervous energy. Neither boy spoke. "That's all right," Lena said after a moment, her tone still warm. "We have plenty of time to get to know each other." The day passed in a blur of conference calls and spreadsheets. Damien emerged from his study only when the setting sun cast long shadows across his desk. The house was quiet, too quiet for a home with 4-year-old twins. He found them in the living room. Lena sat in the oversized armchair by the fireplace, a colorful storybook in her lap. Rowan and Jude stood at opposite ends of the room, pointedly not looking at her. "Would you like to hear a story before bed?" Lena asked, her voice carrying no trace of frustration at their obvious rejection. "This one's about a brave little knight who makes friends with a dragon." Jude's head turned slightly at the mention of dragons, but Rowan tugged at his brother's sleeve. "We're tired," he announced, his small voice firm. "We want to go to bed now." Damien watched as Lena carefully placed the book aside. "Of course. Would you like me to help you get ready?" Both boys shook their heads and hurried past her, their sock feet silent on the carpet. They didn't look at Damien as they passed him in the doorway. Lena remained in the chair, her hands folded in her lap. She showed no sign of disappointment or anger, but something in her stillness made Damien uncomfortable. He retreated to his study without a word, making a mental note to watch her more closely. She wouldn't last long. None of them did. Hours later, when the house had settled into its nighttime silence, Damien finally set aside his work. His neck ached from too many hours at the computer, and his coffee had long since gone cold. He stood, stretching, and opened his door to head to bed. A sound stopped him, so faint he almost missed it. A gentle humming floated down the hallway, soft as a whisper. Despite himself, he followed it. The twins' bedroom door was cracked open, spilling a thin line of lamplight into the dark corridor. Damien moved closer, careful to keep his footsteps silent. The humming grew clearer, a melody he didn't recognize, wrapped in words he barely understood. French, he realized. A lullaby. He peered through the gap in the door. Lena sat in the rocking chair between the boys' beds, her profile illuminated by the soft glow of the nightlight. Her eyes were closed as she sang, her voice barely more than a breath. On either side of her, Rowan and Jude lay sleeping, their faces peaceful for the first time in weeks. Something shifted in Damien's chest, an uncomfortable tightness he couldn't name. He stepped back from the door, unwilling to witness more of this quiet moment. As he walked away, Lena's gentle song followed him down the hall, weaving itself into the shadows of his empty house. The morning sun cast warm rectangles of light across the kitchen floor, turning the polished wood into strips of gold. Lena moved quietly through the space, arranging breakfast plates with careful precision. 2 pieces of whole wheat toast, cut into triangles. Small bowls of fresh berries. Glasses of milk positioned just far enough from the edge of the table to prevent spills. Damien entered, his usual brisk stride faltering slightly at the sight of the thoughtfully prepared table. He'd expected to find the same sullen breakfast scene as yesterday. The twins appeared in their matching school uniforms, navy sweaters slightly rumpled from sleep. Jude's hair stuck up at odd angles, while Rowan's lay flat against his forehead. They paused in the doorway, examining the breakfast setup with cautious interest. "Good morning," Lena said softly, not moving toward them. "I hope you slept well." Rowan slid into his chair without responding, but Jude lingered by the door, his eyes fixed on the perfectly triangular toast points. "Would you like some breakfast, Jude?" Lena asked. "The bread is still warm." To Damien's surprise, Jude nodded and climbed into his seat. He picked up a piece of toast, studying it before taking a small bite. A few crumbs fell onto his sweater. "Here," Lena said, reaching for a napkin. She stopped when Jude tensed, then simply placed the napkin near his plate. "It's there if you need it." Damien watched over the rim of his coffee cup as Rowan struggled with his shoelaces, tiny fingers fumbling with the loops. Usually, the boy would keep trying in frustrated silence until someone noticed, too proud or shy to ask for help. "Would you like me to show you a trick for tying them?" Lena asked, keeping her distance. "My grandmother taught me when I was your age." Rowan glanced at his brother, then at his father, before giving a barely perceptible nod. Lena knelt beside his chair, her movements slow and deliberate. "See? If you make the loops like rabbit ears. Her voice was gentle as she demonstrated, letting Rowan's hands follow along with hers. Damien found himself setting aside his tablet, his morning emails forgotten. He should have left for the office 10 minutes ago, but something held him there, watching this quiet scene unfold. Lena moved between the boys with an easy grace, never rushing, never pushing. She packed their school bags with meticulous attention, checking homework folders, tucking in water bottles, making sure each boy had his favorite pencil. When Jude's bottom lip trembled at the sight of his math worksheet, she slipped a small note inside his lunchbox. Damien couldn't see what she'd written, but Jude's shoulders relaxed slightly. The morning passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls, but Damien's thoughts kept drifting back to the breakfast scene. He left the office earlier than usual, telling himself he needed to review some contracts at home. As he approached the playroom that afternoon, he heard a frustrated cry, followed by the sound of paper being crumpled. He slowed his steps, listening. "It's wrong," Rowan's voice wavered. "I can't make it look right." "May I see?" Lena asked. A pause, then the rustle of paper being smoothed out. "Ah," Lena said. "You know, this reminds me of a story. Would you like to hear it?" Damien moved closer to the door, careful to stay out of sight. "Once upon a time," Lena began, her voice taking on a storyteller's cadence, "there was a quiet prince who couldn't speak to the moon." Why couldn't he speak to the moon? Jude's voice piped up, closer to the door than Damien expected. "Well," Lena said, and Damien heard the scratch of pencil on paper. Every night the moon would shine so brightly through his window, asking him to come out and play. But the prince was shy, you see. He had so many beautiful thoughts in his head, but the words got stuck in his throat like honey. "Like when Rowan wants to answer questions in class?" Jude asked. A soft shuffle suggested Rowan had moved closer too. "Perhaps," Lena said. Her voice deepened dramatically. Come out, the moon would call. "I've seen the pictures you draw, little prince. I've watched you dance when you think no one is looking." Damien peered around the doorframe. Lena sat cross-legged on the floor, a sheet of paper before her. As she spoke, her pencil moved across the page, bringing the story to life with quick, simple strokes. The boys leaned in on either side of her, their eyes wide. "But the prince was afraid his words wouldn't be perfect," Lena continued, her voice returning to normal. "Until one night, when a shooting star streaked across the sky." Her pencil made a swift arc across the paper. "And do you know what the star said?" "What?" both boys whispered. Lena's voice became a sparkly whisper. "Sometimes the most beautiful things aren't perfect at all." A small laugh escaped Jude, the first Damien had heard in months. The sound struck him like a physical thing, making him grip the doorframe tighter. "The star was right," Lena said, adding details to her drawing. "Look at the moon itself, full of craters and shadows, but still so beautiful. Look at the clouds. Do they ever make exactly the same shape twice?" "No," Rowan said softly, reaching for a pencil. Can I try drawing the star?" "Of course you can," Lena smiled. "And while you draw, shall I tell you about the night the prince finally found his voice?" Damien backed away from the door as another laugh, Rowan's this time, floated out into the hallway. He retreated to his study, but the sounds of storytelling and occasional giggles kept drawing his attention from his work. Later that night, long after the boys were asleep, Damien stood in the empty playroom. The drawing from earlier still lay on the low table, a moon with a gentle face, surrounded by imperfect stars. Rowan's careful lines merged with Lena's more confident strokes, creating something unexpectedly beautiful. Damien reached into his pocket and withdrew a small camera, no bigger than a golf ball. He'd ordered it that afternoon, telling himself it was a necessary security measure. New staff member, vulnerable children. It was only prudent to monitor things. He found a discreet spot on the bookshelf, positioning the camera to capture most of the room. As he adjusted the angle, his eyes fell on the drawing again. The moon's smile seemed to question him, making him pause. But he completed the installation anyway, checking the feed on his phone to ensure it was working. He told himself it was for their safety, for his peace of mind. He ignored the small voice that whispered he was really installing it because he wanted to understand, to see what kind of magic this quiet woman was weaving with her stories, to know how she was reaching his sons when everyone else had failed. The camera's tiny red light blinked once before going dark, invisible among the shadows of the bookshelf. Damien left the room quickly, not looking back at the moon's knowing smile. The next evening found Damien in his study, his desk lamp casting a warm circle of light in the darkening room. His laptop screen glowed as he pulled up the camera feed from the playroom. He told himself he'd just check a few minutes of footage, but as the scene unfolded before him, he found himself unable to look away. Lena sat cross-legged on the floor, her skirt pooled around her like a flower. Rowan and Jude nestled against her sides, their small faces upturned and attentive. The camera's microphone picked up her voice clearly. "Once upon a time," she began, her hands moving as she spoke, "there lived a king in a beautiful castle. He was very wise and good at running his kingdom, but his heart was heavy with sadness." Damien's fingers tightened on his mouse as he watched. The king had two wonderful sons, twin princes who were as different as sun and shadow, yet as close as 2 pages in a book. Lena gently touched each boy's head as she spoke. But the king didn't know how to talk to them about his sadness, and they didn't know how to talk to him about theirs. Jude shifted closer to Lena. Why was everyone sad? Because the queen, their mother, had gone to live among the stars, Lena said softly, and they all missed her very much. Damien's breath caught in his throat. He should stop the video, should close his laptop and walk away. But he couldn't. One day, Lena continued, a girl came to work at the castle. She wasn't a princess or a noble lady, just a quiet person who carried stories in her heart like others might carry precious jewels. "Like you?" Rowan asked, his voice so clear through the speakers that Damien started. Lena smiled gently. "Perhaps." Now, this girl saw how the king and his sons lived in the same castle but felt so far apart. She wanted to help, but she wasn't sure how. What did she do? Jude leaned forward. "Well, that's where you come in," Lena said. "You see, the girl had a choice to make. The king was standing at a crossroads. On one side was a tall mountain, and on the other was a flowing river. Which should she suggest he visit?" "The mountain?" Rowan said immediately. "No, the river," Jude countered. "Rivers are better for thinking." "Why do you think the river would be better, Jude?" Lena asked. "Because," Jude fiddled with his sleeve, "because when you're sad, moving things help. Like when we watch the fish in the garden pond." Damien pressed his knuckles to his mouth, remembering how often he'd seen Jude by the pond, especially after. "That's very thoughtful," Lena said. "Rowan, why did you choose the mountain?" "Because you can see everything from up high," Rowan explained. "Maybe if the king sees his whole kingdom, he'll remember he's not alone." On the screen, Lena nodded. "Those are both wonderful ideas. What if we let the king visit both places? First, he could sit by the river and listen to its song. Then, when he feels ready, he could climb the mountain." The boys nodded enthusiastically. "Now," Lena continued, "the girl with the stories had another choice to make. She knew something that might help the king and the princes, but she was afraid. Should she tell them her secret or keep it to herself?" "Tell them," both boys said at once. "Even if it might make them angry?" Lena asked. The twins fell silent, considering. "I think," Rowan said slowly, "I think sometimes the truth hurts first, but helps later. Like when I fell and cut my knee, and the medicine stung, but made it better." Damien watched as Lena blinked rapidly, her hand moving to touch something at her throat. "The truth is important," she agreed softly. So the girl gathered her courage and went to the king. She told him that she understood his sadness because she too had lost someone she loved. She told him that it's okay to miss people and still find new ways to be happy. "I think the king is sad because he misses the queen," Jude said quietly. Damien felt moisture on his cheeks. He wiped it away with trembling fingers. "Yes," Lena said. "And the princes missed her too." But the girl helped them understand that sharing their sadness made it easier to bear. She showed them how stories could build bridges between hearts, how words could heal what time alone could not. The video continued, but Damien had to pause it. He stood and walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. How had this woman, this stranger, found such a gentle way to voice what he couldn't? The next night, he found himself drawn back to the footage like a moth to flame. This time, he came prepared with a notebook and pen. As he watched Lena weave another tale with the boys, he began writing down phrases that caught his attention. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is ask for help," she told the twins in this new story. Damien's pen moved across the page, capturing her words. "Love doesn't get smaller when we share it," she said later, as she helped the boys act out a scene with paper puppets. "It grows bigger, like a garden with room for new flowers." Page after page filled with these gentle truths. Damien found himself returning to them during the day, turning them over in his mind like smooth stones in a river. That night, when he finally went to bed, something felt different. The usual weight of grief still pressed against his chest, but it felt less crushing somehow. When sleep came, it was deeper than it had been in months. He didn't dream of Sarah's final days in the hospital, of machines beeping and doctors speaking in low voices. Instead, he dreamed of a river and a mountain, of stories floating like autumn leaves on the wind. And when Sarah appeared in his dreams, she was smiling. Not with sadness or accusation, but with a gentle understanding that followed him into waking. The Saturday morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when rapid footsteps echoed through the quiet halls of the Hale estate. Damien, usually a light sleeper, was startled awake by the unusual sound of his bedroom door bursting open. "Dad! Dad! Wake up!" Jude's voice rang out with an excitement that felt foreign in these rooms. Rowan appeared beside his brother, clutching something made of paper. "We have to show you something." Damien blinked, his mind still fuzzy with sleep. The twins hadn't woken him up like this since before Sarah. He sat up slowly, taking in their flushed faces and bright eyes. "What time is it?" he asked, reaching for his watch. "Time for puppets," Jude announced, grabbing Damien's hand. The touch was so unexpected that Damien nearly pulled away, but something made him stop. His son's small fingers were warm and insistent. Puppets. Damien found himself being tugged out of bed, his bare feet touching the cool hardwood floor. "We made them with Lena," Rowan explained, already heading for the door. "Come on, they're in the kitchen." Still in his pajamas and robe, Damien let himself be led downstairs. The morning light streamed through the kitchen windows, catching dust motes in its golden beams. On the kitchen table lay an array of paper figures, carefully colored and attached to thin wooden sticks. "Look!" Jude held up one of the puppets proudly. "This is the king. See his crown? I made it gold, like real kings wear." "And this is the girl," Rowan added, showing another puppet with long brown hair and a simple dress. "Lena helped me draw her face." Damien picked up the third puppet, a flowing blue shape with silver details. "And this is the Moon River," both boys said together. "Can we show you the story?" Jude asked, bouncing on his toes. "Please, we practiced." Before Damien could respond, movement in the doorway caught his attention. Lena stood there, hesitating at the threshold. She wore a simple sweater and skirt, her hair loose around her shoulders. When their eyes met, she took a small step back. "I'm sorry if they woke you," she said softly. They were so excited. "No, it's..." Damien cleared his throat. "It's fine. They want to perform their story." Lena nodded, wringing her hand slightly. "I can leave you to..." "Stay," Damien found himself saying. "Please. You helped create this, after all." Surprise flickered across her face, but she moved into the kitchen, taking a seat at the far end of the table. Damien sat down too, watching as the twins scrambled to set up their makeshift stage using a large picture book as a backdrop. "Once upon a time," Jude began, his voice taking on a storyteller's cadence that made Damien's lips twitch. "There was a very smart king who lived in a big castle. Rowan manipulated the king puppet, making it move across their improvised stage. But he was really sad because the queen had gone to live with the stars. And his 2 sons," Jude continued, introducing 2 smaller puppets Damien hadn't noticed before. "Didn't know how to make him happy again." Damien's throat tightened. He glanced at Lena, but she was watching the boys, her expression gentle and encouraging. Then one day, Rowan took over, bringing out the girl puppet. Someone new came to the castle. She wasn't fancy or special, but she knew lots and lots of stories. "And she saw how everyone was sad," Jude added. "So she told the king about the Moon River." The blue puppet swirled across the stage, its silver details catching the light. Damien watched, transfixed, as his sons acted out the tale of how the king visited the magical river that flowed with starlight and memories. "The Moon River showed the king that it was okay to be sad," Rowan explained, making the puppets dance. "But it also showed him how to be happy again." "Because the queen was in the river!" Jude exclaimed, getting so excited he nearly knocked over their backdrop. "She was in the stars and the water and everywhere beautiful." "Careful, sweetheart," Lena said softly, steadying the book. "And then," Rowan continued, "the girl taught the princes how to make their own stories, so they could always remember the queen, but also make new happy things happen." The performance grew more chaotic as both boys tried to control all the puppets at once, their voices rising with enthusiasm. The king puppet accidentally headbutted the Moon River, making Damien laugh, a sudden genuine sound that surprised even him. Jude beamed at the sound, his whole face lighting up. "Dad, you laughed." "I suppose I did," Damien said, still smiling slightly. The boys launched into an elaborate finale involving all the puppets swirling together in what they called a happy dance. When they finished, Damien found himself applauding, his heart fuller than it had felt in months. "That was wonderful," he said, meaning it. "Thank you both." The twins rushed to hug him, another gesture that had become rare lately. Over their heads, he saw Lena quietly standing to leave. "Miss Moreau," he called out, making her pause. "Thank you." She turned, looking uncertain. "I didn't do much. They came up with most of it themselves." "No," Damien said firmly, disentangling himself from the boys. "You did something remarkable here. You gave us all a way to talk about things we couldn't before." Lena's eyes widened, and Damien saw them grow bright with unshed tears. She clearly hadn't expected any acknowledgement, let alone gratitude, from the man who had barely spoken 10 words to her since her arrival. She started, then stopped, composing herself. Stories have a way of healing hearts, if we let them. Before anyone could respond, Jude ran over and threw his arms around her waist in an impulsive hug. Lena froze for a moment, then gently returned the embrace, her hand smoothing the boy's wild hair. Later that evening, after the twins were in bed, Damien sat in his study with a glass of whiskey. His laptop was open, displaying the day's security footage from the kitchen. He watched the morning's performance again, paying closer attention to details he'd missed in the moment. The careful way Lena had guided the boys without taking over. The genuine joy in his sons' faces. The natural way they'd included him in their world of stories and imagination. He paused the video on the moment when Jude hugged Lena. The frame captured something pure and unguarded. His son's complete trust, Lena's surprised tenderness, the simple truth of human connection. Damien's expression remained unreadable as he studied the image. Then, slowly, a small smile lifted the corners of his mouth. "Tell me another story," he said quietly to the empty room. The spring breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers through the open windows as Lena waited for the twins to return from preschool. She had spent the morning tidying their art supplies and preparing a light snack, knowing they'd be hungry after their day. When the door opened, she heard their excited chatter before she saw them. They burst into the kitchen, backpacks bouncing, faces flushed from running. "Lena! Lena!" Jude called out, already digging through his folder. "Look what we got!" Rowan approached more slowly, but his eyes sparkled with the same excitement. "It's about the spring play," he explained, watching as his brother finally extracted a crumpled yellow flyer. Lena smoothed out the paper on the kitchen table, reading aloud with deliberate enthusiasm. "Annual Spring Play Festival. All students are invited to participate in individual or group performances." She looked up at the boys. "That sounds wonderful." The twins exchanged meaningful glances, one of those silent conversations that only siblings could have. Lena waited patiently, remembering how in previous years, according to their teacher, they had always declined to participate. "Can we?" Jude started, bouncing on his toes. "Can we do our story?" Rowan finished, his voice soft but eager. Lena's heart swelled. The Moon River and the Quiet King. Both boys nodded vigorously. "We already know it," Jude exclaimed. "And we have the puppets." "We could make it bigger," Rowan added thoughtfully. "With real costumes, maybe." "Of course we can," Lena said, already reaching for her notebook. "Let's see how we can turn it into a proper play. Would you like that?" The next few days transformed the Hale household into an impromptu theater workshop. Lena helped the boys write down their lines, adapting their beloved story into something that would work on stage. They used the playroom as their rehearsal space, pushing furniture aside to create a performance area. Jude took to his role as the Moon River with boundless energy, twirling and swishing around the room in a blue blanket they'd temporarily borrowed from the linen closet. Rowan, naturally more reserved, found his confidence growing as he practiced being the Quiet King. Through it all, Damien watched through the hidden camera, his notebook filling with observations and ideas. He began sending suggestions through Mrs. Peterson, the housekeeper, who delivered them as casual mentions during her daily routines. The master thought perhaps the king might need a proper crown, she'd say while delivering fresh towels, or Mr. Hale mentioned that the servant girl ought to have a name of her own. Lena incorporated each suggestion seamlessly, knowing their true source but respecting the distance Damien maintained. When Rowan struggled with a particularly emotional scene, she gently guided him through it, using techniques that helped him express his feelings without becoming overwhelmed. "Remember," she'd say, kneeling beside him, "the king is sad, but he's also brave. He's trying his best to help his kingdom, just like you're trying your best with this scene." During one particularly challenging rehearsal, Jude had a meltdown over forgotten lines. He threw his script down and kicked it across the room, tears streaming down his face. "I can't do it," he shouted. "I'm stupid." Lena gathered him close, letting him cry it out. "You're not stupid at all," she murmured. "You're learning something new, and that's always hard at first. Shall we try it a different way?" She helped him turn his lines into a song, matching them to the melody of his favorite nursery rhyme. Soon, he was singing about starlight and magic, his frustration forgotten in the joy of performance. The props grew more elaborate as the days passed. Cardboard became castle walls, painted with careful detail during art time. Rowan spent hours drawing stars to decorate the backdrop, while Jude insisted on adding glitter to everything he could reach. One night, long after the boys had gone to bed, Lena sat at the kitchen table surrounded by sketch papers and fabric swatches. She had been working on costume designs, trying to create something special that would make the twins feel like true performers while staying within practical limits. The soft sound of footsteps made her look up, startled. Damien stood in the doorway, still in his work clothes, but with his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Would you like help?" he asked finally, his voice quiet in the late-night stillness. Lena's pencil stilled against the paper. Yes, if you'd like to." Damien pulled out a chair and sat beside her, careful to leave comfortable space between them. He picked up one of the sketches, a design for Rowan's kingly robes. "These are good," he said, studying the details. "But maybe—" He reached for a pencil, then paused, looking at her for permission. Lena nodded, sliding the paper closer to him. "Please." He began adding subtle changes to the design, explaining as he worked. "Rowan gets anxious about things touching his neck. If we modify the collar here—" His pencil moved smoothly across the paper. "And maybe add pockets. He likes to have somewhere to put his hands when he's nervous." "You notice so much about them," Lena said softly. Damien's hand stilled. "I try to. Now, at least." He set the pencil down carefully. "I wasn't always— After Sarah died, You don't have to explain," Lena assured him, sensing his struggle. They worked together quietly after that, passing sketches back and forth. Damien suggested practical modifications, while Lena added magical touches that would delight the boys. When she described her idea for Jude's Moon River costume, layers of flowing fabric with tiny lights sewn in, Damien actually smiled. "He'll love that," he said, "though we might never get him to take it off." "We could make him a simpler version for everyday wear," Lena suggested, already sketching. "Something that captures the magic, but works for regular days too." She felt Damien watching her draw, his presence both unsettling and oddly comfortable. For the first time, they were working together without the buffer of cameras or distance, without the boys' energy filling the space between them. The kitchen clock ticked softly, marking time as they continued their quiet collaboration. Upstairs, the camera in the playroom sat idle, its footage unwatched for the first time since Lena's arrival. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the preschool's small auditorium as parents filed in, their quiet chatter filling the space with nervous energy. Some carried bouquets of flowers, others clutched programs printed on colorful paper. The familiar scent of coffee from disposable cups mingled with the musty smell of the old curtains. Damien Hale stood at the entrance, his dark suit making him look more like he was headed to a board meeting than a children's play. His fingers kept adjusting his tie, a nervous habit he thought he'd broken years ago. The fabric felt too tight, the collar too stiff. He scanned the crowd of parents, most of whom were dressed casually in jeans and spring sweaters, and felt distinctly out of place. "Damien, over here!" A familiar voice cut through the murmur of conversation. His younger sister Cecily waved from her seat near the middle, her bright smile a stark contrast to his tense expression. She had driven an hour to be here, though he hadn't asked her to come. He nodded in acknowledgement, but chose a seat alone, 3 rows ahead. The empty chairs beside him felt like a buffer zone, necessary space between himself and the casual warmth of other families. His hands rested on his knees, too still, too controlled. Behind the curtain, he knew the twins were getting ready. He'd left early that morning, before their usual breakfast routine, unable to face their excitement without revealing his own anxiety. Lena had been there, helping them into their costumes, her calm presence a steady anchor for their nervous energy. The lights dimmed gradually, and a hush fell over the audience. The principal made a brief welcome speech, her words washing over Damien without really registering. His attention was fixed on the heavy red curtain waiting, When it finally opened, his breath caught. There stood Rowan, his small frame wrapped in royal blue robes that somehow managed to look both dignified and comfortable. The crown on his head, crafted from painted cardboard and rhinestones, sat slightly crooked. But it was his expression that struck Damien hardest, focused, serious, completely in character as the quiet king. Jude burst onto the stage in a swirl of silvery fabric that caught the light like water. Tiny LED lights had been sewn into the costume, twinkling as he moved. His face shone with pure joy as he twirled and danced, embodying the magical moon river with every movement. From his seat, Damien could just make out Lena's silhouette in the wings, watching intently. Her hands were clasped together, and even in the darkness, he could see her mouthing the words along with the boys, ready to prompt if needed. The story unfolded beautifully. Rowan delivered his lines with careful precision, each word clear despite his soft voice. Jude's natural exuberance brought life to the magical elements, his improvisations fitting seamlessly into the tale they'd crafted together. Then came the final scene. Damien knew the script. They'd rehearsed it countless times in the playroom. But suddenly, Rowan stepped forward, off script, his voice stronger than before. "The king forgot how to smile," he announced to the audience, until the servant girl helped him remember. Jude bounced on his toes, adding, "But he needed his family too. Come on stage, King Daddy." The audience's laughter was warm, appreciative. Damien sat frozen, his heart pounding. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't what they'd practiced. He felt the weight of every eye in the room turn toward him. "Go on," Cecily whispered fiercely from behind him, giving his shoulder a gentle push. "Don't you dare disappoint them now." His legs felt wooden as he stood. The walk to the stage seemed endless, each step echoing in his ears. He was acutely aware of his polished shoes on the worn steps, of his stiff suit in the bright stage lights. Rowan approached him solemnly, holding up a second crown, one Damien hadn't known existed. It was identical to the one Rowan wore, clearly made with the same loving attention to detail. With careful movements, his son placed it on his head. The cardboard felt light, almost weightless, but the meaning behind it pressed heavy on his heart. Before he could process that moment, Jude crashed into his legs, wrapping his arms tight around them. The silvery costume sparkled, and Damien felt some of the glitter transferring to his dark pants. Somehow, that small detail made everything feel more real. "Now you're part of the story too," Jude declared into the microphone he still held, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. The audience's applause was thunderous in the small space. Through the stage lights, Damien caught glimpses of smiling faces, a few tears. Cecily was beaming, her phone held up to capture the moment. But his eyes were drawn to the wings, where Lena stood with her hands pressed to her mouth, her expression a mix of joy and terror. Later that night, after the excitement had faded and the twins had finally fallen asleep still wearing pieces of their costumes, Damien found Lena in the hallway. She was pacing, her fingers twisting together, clearly waiting for him. "Mr. Hale," she started as soon as she saw him, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to apologize. The boys asked me to help them write that ending, but I should have consulted you first. It was completely inappropriate of me to—" "Lena." His voice was low, raw with emotion he couldn't quite contain. She rushed on, words tumbling out. "I understand if you want me to resign. I've already started packing my things. I never meant to overstep or make you uncomfortable. The boys just wanted so badly to include you, and I thought, but it wasn't my place to—" "Please don't stop." The words came out rougher than he intended, almost desperate. He took a breath. Tried again. "Not just for them. For me, too." Lena's stream of apologies cut off abruptly. She stood very still, staring at him with wide eyes, speechless for the first time since he'd met her. Sunday morning dawned with golden light streaming through the kitchen windows, casting warm patterns across the marble countertops. The gentle sizzle of pancakes on the griddle filled the air with a sweet, homey aroma that seemed to soften the usual formal atmosphere of the Hale estate. Rowan and Jude sat at the kitchen island, their legs swinging from the tall stools as they chattered excitedly. Their hair was still tousled from sleep, wearing matching dinosaur pajamas that had seen better days. A plate of finished pancakes sat between them, already decorated with generous swirls of maple syrup. "What if the queen turns into a beautiful bird?" Rowan suggested, his fork drawing invisible patterns in the syrup. "Like, maybe she's watching over everyone from the sky." Jude bounced in his seat, nearly knocking over his glass of milk. "Yes, and there could be a magic forest that talks to her, with trees that whisper secrets." Lena stood at the stove, expertly flipping another pancake. She wore a simple cotton dress with an apron tied around her waist, her dark hair pulled back in a loose braid. A small smile played at her lips as she listened to the twins' increasingly elaborate ideas. "Those are wonderful ideas," she said, sliding a fresh pancake onto Rowan's plate. "Maybe we should write them all down before we forget." "I could type while you illustrate." The quiet offer came from the doorway where Damien stood, already dressed in casual slacks and a light sweater. He held his usual morning coffee but hadn't touched it yet. His presence, normally commanding and slightly intimidating, seemed softer in the morning light. Lena's hand stilled momentarily over the griddle. "Are you sure? I wouldn't want to impose on your Sunday." "I'd like to help," he said simply, setting his coffee down. "The study might be more comfortable than the kitchen." The twins scrambled down from their stools, all thoughts of breakfast forgotten. "Can we bring our pancakes?" Jude asked, already gathering his plate. "Carefully," Lena cautioned, turning off the stove. "And maybe we should change out of pajamas first." 20 minutes later, the formal study had transformed into an impromptu creative space. Damien sat at his desk, laptop open, while Lena perched on a chair beside him with her sketchbook. The twins sprawled on the Persian rug, surrounded by colored pencils and paper. "So, the queen becomes a bird," Damien began typing, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "What kind of bird should she be?" "A swan," said Rowan. "No, a phoenix," countered Jude. "What about a dove?" Lena suggested gently, her pencil already sketching fluid lines. "They're often seen as messengers of peace and love." Damien's typing slowed. "Sarah, my wife. She used to say that doves appeared in her dreams sometimes. She thought they were carrying messages from her mother." The room grew quiet for a moment. Lena's pencil paused mid-stroke, and the twins looked up from their drawing. It was rare for their father to mention their mother so openly. "That's beautiful," Lena said softly. "Perhaps we could work that into the story somehow. The queen dove bringing messages of comfort to those she left behind." Damien nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The metaphor works well, and structurally, it gives us a way to connect different parts of the narrative." As the morning progressed, the story grew in unexpected ways. The twins added fantastic elements: giant friendly monsters that guarded the talking forest, magical moonberries that granted wishes when eaten under a full moon. Their excitement was contagious, their ideas tumbling out faster than Damien could type. Lena's initial hesitation faded as she became absorbed in the creative process. Her illustrations brought their ideas to life: delicate sketches of the dove queen soaring through clouds, whimsical drawings of the talking trees with faces hidden in their bark. She found herself suggesting plot points, her voice growing more confident as Damien built upon her ideas with his own insights. "What if the moonberries only grant wishes that come from the heart?" she mused, adding details to a sketch. "It could teach children about the difference between wanting things and needing them." "That's quite clever," Damien remarked, looking at her with newfound respect. "It adds depth without being preachy." Jude chose that moment to demonstrate how a monster would dance after eating moonberries. his wild movements sending colored pencils rolling across the floor. The performance was so ridiculous that Lena couldn't help herself. A loud, genuine laugh burst from her lips, echoing through the study. She immediately clapped a hand over her mouth, her cheeks flushing. The sound seemed too big, too unrestrained for the elegant room with its leather-bound books and serious atmosphere. But before she could apologize, she caught Damien watching her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, their eyes met. The air seemed to still around them, heavy with something unnamed. Then, unexpectedly, Damien's lips curved into a smile, and he joined in her laughter. The sound was rusty, as if long unused, but real. The twins stared at their father in delighted shock before dissolving into giggles themselves. Soon the study rang with shared laughter, the sound transforming the usually austere space into something warmer, more alive. Hours later, when the story was saved and the twins were finally in bed, Lena sat at the small desk in her room. A simple journal lay open before her, its pages illuminated by the soft glow of her bedside lamp. Her hand moved across the paper, forming words she knew would never be read. "Dear Diary, I think I might be falling in love with the way he listens. Not just to the stories or the children, but to the spaces between words. The way his eyes focus completely on whoever is speaking, as if their thoughts are precious things worthy of his full attention. The way he catches nuances I thought no one would notice. The way he's beginning to hear the music and laughter again." She stopped writing, staring at the words for a long moment. Then, with deliberate movements, she closed the journal and slipped it into her desk drawer. The lamp clicked off, leaving her room in darkness. But the memory of shared laughter lingered in the quiet. The rain drummed steadily against the windows of the Hale estate, turning the morning light gray and diffuse. Inside the twins' bedroom, Rowan and Jude huddled under their blankets, faces flushed with fever. Their usual energy was subdued by stuffy noses and sore throats. Lena sat in the oversized armchair between their beds, a worn notebook open in her lap. She had been with them since dawn, bringing juice and medicine, checking temperatures and offering quiet comfort. Now, as the rain created a soothing backdrop, she began to tell them a new story. "Once upon a time," she started, her voice soft and melodious, "there lived a servant girl in a grand palace. She wasn't like the other servants. Her pockets were always filled with scraps of paper where she wrote down the stories that filled her head." In the hallway, Damien paused on his way to his study. He hadn't meant to listen, but something in Lena's tone made him stop. Through the partially open door, he could see her profile, illuminated by the dim morning light. "The servant girl had a secret," Lena continued, absently stroking Jude's hair as he sniffled. "She loved the prince of the palace, not because he was handsome or rich, but because late at night, when everyone else was asleep, she would hear him playing beautiful music on his piano. The melodies seemed to speak directly to her heart." Rowan pulled his blanket up to his chin. Did the prince love her too? A shadow crossed Lena's face, so brief that anyone else might have missed it. But Damien, standing motionless in the hall, caught the flicker of pain in her expression. "The prince didn't know her," she said. "You see, the servant girl was very good at staying invisible. But every night, after hearing his music, she would write stories inspired by the melodies. She would leave the stories, unsigned, outside his chamber door." "What happened next?" Jude asked, his voice hoarse but interested. Lena's fingers traced the edge of her notebook. "The prince began to fall in love with the stories. He would read them over and over, trying to guess who wrote them. But before he could discover the truth, something happened that made the servant girl leave the palace forever." "What made her leave?" both boys asked in unison. "Sometimes," Lena said carefully, "people we trust can hurt us in ways we never expect. The servant girl learned that the hard way, so she disappeared, leaving behind only her stories and her broken heart." Damien frowned, stepping back from the doorway. Something about the story felt raw, personal, in a way that made him uncomfortable. It wasn't like Lena's usual tales. This one carried an undercurrent of real pain. That evening, after the twins had finally fallen into fever-induced sleep and Lena had retired to her room, Damien sat in his study. The rain continued to fall outside, creating patterns on his laptop screen. His cursor hovered over the search bar for a long moment before he typed, "Lena Moreau." Guilt gnawed at him as he clicked through the results. It felt like a violation of trust, but something about that story had awakened his investigative instincts. The first few links were unremarkable: social media profiles long abandoned, a few academic awards from her university days. Then he found it. A literary magazine article from 5 years ago. Rising Star Falls, Plagiarism Scandal Rocks, Children's Literature World. His stomach tightened as he read. Lena Moreau, once considered a prodigy in the university's creative writing program, had been accused of stealing the manuscripts for the Clock Tower children's series. The real author, according to the article, was her then-boyfriend, Marcus Chen. The evidence seemed damning. Drafts found on her laptop, early sketches of characters, detailed plot outlines. Damien pushed back from his desk, running a hand through his hair. The Clock Tower children. He remembered Sarah reading those books to the twins when they were younger. The stories had been magical, full of whimsy and hidden wisdom. The boys had loved them before everything changed. The next morning, leaving Lena to care for the still sick twins, Damien drove to the local bookstore. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the world looking washed clean. Inside the store, he found the familiar spines easily. 6 books, their covers featuring intricate clockwork designs and mysterious doorways. He pulled out the first volume, opening to the dedication page. There, in simple black text, were the words that made his heart skip. "To the girl who told me stories before I could write them." Damien bought the entire series, though his house already owned copies. On the drive home, his mind kept returning to Lena's story about the servant girl. He thought about the way she handled paper so reverently, how she always seemed to have a notebook nearby, how her stories seemed to flow from some deep, authentic place. That night, after checking on the twins one last time, Damien returned to his study. The camera footage from the past few weeks was organized neatly in folders on his laptop. He opened one at random, watching as Lena told stories to his sons. But this time, he watched differently. Not as an employer evaluating a nanny, not as a father monitoring his children's care, but as a man trying to understand a woman who carried hidden wounds. He noticed things he'd missed before. The way she sometimes paused mid-sentence, as if catching herself from saying too much. The careful way she guided the twins to create their own endings rather than imposing her own. The slight tremor in her hands when she drew particularly emotional scenes. Each detail seemed to paint a different picture than the one presented in that damning article. He thought about the dedication in the book, "The girl who told me stories." He remembered the servant girl in Lena's tale, leaving her stories unsigned at the prince's door. Slowly, deliberately, Damien closed his laptop. The room fell into darkness except for the faint glow of his desk lamp. Outside, a new round of rain began to fall. He sat there, surrounded by the 6 volumes of the Clock Tower children, uncertain what to do with all he had learned. The morning light filtered through the kitchen windows, casting a warm glow on Lena as she packed snacks for the twins. Her quiet humming filled the space as she carefully wrapped apple slices and tucked them into small containers. The boys were feeling better, their fevers finally broken, and would return to preschool today. Damien stood in the doorway, watching her methodical movements. The weight of what he'd discovered pressed heavily on his chest. Her hands moved with practiced care as she added little notes with drawn hearts and stars, the kind of detail that had made his sons smile more in recent weeks than they had in the past year. Before he could step forward to speak, the sharp click of heels on hardwood announced Cecily's arrival. His sister swept into the kitchen, her smile tight and her eyes keen with purpose. She greeted the twins warmly when they shuffled in for breakfast, but her gaze kept returning to Lena with barely concealed suspicion. "Good morning, everyone," Cecily said, her voice carrying that particular tone she reserved for business meetings and difficult conversations. "Lena, I wonder if we might have a word in the garden after breakfast. The weather's lovely." Lena looked up, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "Of course," she said softly, returning to helping Jude with his cereal. Damien recognized the set of his sister's shoulders. She was on a mission. He opened his mouth to intervene, but Cecily shot him a look that clearly said, "Let me handle this." After the twins left for school, Cecily led Lena to the garden. Morning dew still clung to the roses and a gentle breeze stirred the leaves. They walked in silence until reaching a stone bench far from the house windows. "Please, sit," Cecily said, her politeness razor-sharp. Lena settled onto the bench, her hands folded in her lap. She looked small against the sprawling garden backdrop, but there was a quiet dignity in her posture. "I'll be direct," Cecily began, standing over her. "I've done some research into your background, Ms. Moreau. The plagiarism scandal at your university, the Clock Tower Children's series, your relationship with Marcus Chen." Lena didn't flinch, though her fingers tightened slightly in her lap. "My brother has been through enough," Cecily continued. "Those boys have been through enough. If you're using them, using their grief and need for connection to manipulate your way into this family." "I've never wanted anything that wasn't freely given," Lena interrupted quietly, her voice steady despite its softness. The words hung in the morning air between them. Cecily paused, studying her. "That's not a denial." "No," Lena agreed. "It's the truth." As Lena shifted on the bench, her worn messenger bag slipped from her shoulder. A leather-bound journal tumbled out, landing open on the dewy grass. Pages fluttered in the breeze, pages filled with flowing handwriting and delicate sketches in the margins. Cecily's eyes narrowed at the sight. Lena reached for the journal, but Cecily was faster, snatching it up before it could get wet. "Please," Lena said, her composure cracking slightly. "That's private." Something in her tone made Cecily hesitate. She closed the journal but didn't return it immediately. "I think I'll hold on to this for now," she said, her voice slightly softer but still firm. Later that day, after everyone else had retired to their rooms, Cecily sat in the library with the journal open on her lap. Her initial intention had been to look for evidence of manipulation or deceit. Instead, she found something entirely different. The pages were filled with story drafts, beautiful, intricate fairy tales that wove hope and healing through their narratives. Character sketches showed the development of princes, kings, and magical creatures, each bearing careful notes about their emotional journeys. Between these were unsent letters, raw and honest in their vulnerability. One letter in particular caught her eye. It was dated just a few days ago, addressed to Damien. "I love you, but if loving you harms the boys, I'll leave. I won't be another wound they carry." Cecily's hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages. She found earlier entries dating back to before the scandal. Original drafts of stories that would later appear in the Clock Tower Children's series, but with a voice that was unmistakably different from the published versions. More personal, more painful, more real. There were letters to Marcus, too, never sent. "You took my stories and made them yours. But you couldn't take my voice, not really. It just took me this long to believe that again." As night fell, Cecily made her way to Damien's study. She found him at his desk, surrounded by the volumes of the Clock Tower Children he'd purchased. Without a word, she placed the leather journal in front of him and gave a single decisive nod. Damien looked up at his sister, questions in his eyes, but she had already turned to leave. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving him alone with Lena's private thoughts. His hands were steady as he opened the journal, but his heart raced as he began to read. Page after page revealed not the calculated manipulation he'd feared, but rather a soul trying desperately to heal while helping others do the same. The truth spilled out through every word, not of deception, but of restraint, not of schemes, but of grief, not of manipulation, but of love held carefully in check. The stories were there, the original versions of tales that had comforted his sons, raw and unpolished but blazing with authentic emotion. Between them were the quiet confessions of a woman who had lost her voice once and was terrified of losing it again, who loved his family but wouldn't risk hurting them, who had chosen silence over defense, service over self-protection. Damien's fingers traced the words of her unsent letter to him, feeling the slight indentations where her pen had pressed into the paper. In the quiet of his study, surrounded by books and truth, he read on. The morning sun cast long shadows across Lena's desk as she stared at the email on her screen. The offer was more than generous. A position with the Beaumont family in southern France, complete with accommodation in their centuries-old chateau and housing assistance for her aging parents. Double her current salary. A fresh start. Her finger hovered over the "Accept" button for several long moments before she finally pressed it. The quiet click seemed to echo in her small room, final and irreversible. Lena moved through the following days like a ghost, packing her belongings when the boys were at school and Damien was at work. Each item she tucked away felt like another goodbye. Her art supplies, her books, the small collection of toys the twins had given her. She left out just enough to maintain the illusion of normalcy, not wanting her last days with them to be shadowed by sadness. Damien noticed the change in her, though he said nothing. He caught the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore, how she held the boys a little longer during bedtime stories, how she sometimes paused in doorways as if memorizing the scene before her. But he remained silent, watching through the camera feed as she moved through the playroom with an air of quiet finality. The days slipped by too quickly. On her final evening, Lena sat in the familiar spot between the twins' beds, her heart heavy with unspoken farewells. The boys were already in their pajamas, tucked under their favorite blankets, Rowan's blue one with stars, Jude's red one with dragons. "What story tonight?" Jude asked, snuggling deeper into his pillow. Lena's voice was soft but steady as she began. Once upon a time, there was a kingdom wrapped in shadows of grief. The people walked with their heads down, speaking in whispers, because their beloved queen had gone to live among the stars. Rowan's eyes grew wide. He recognized elements of their own story, but something in Lena's tone made him listen more intently than usual. "The king of this kingdom was a good man with a broken heart," she continued. "He forgot how to dream, forgot how to see the colors in the world. His twin sons, bright as morning stars, lived in the quiet of their father's sadness." Jude reached out and took her hand, a gesture that nearly broke her composure. She squeezed it gently and pressed on. One day, a girl came to the castle. She carried stories in her heart like precious gems, stories that could make flowers bloom and stars dance. She shared these stories with the princes, watching joy return to their eyes. And slowly, very slowly, the king remembered how to smile. "Like you," Rowan whispered. "You made Daddy smile again." Lena swallowed hard. The girl loved the little family more than she could say. But she knew something important. Sometimes love means knowing when to step away. Sometimes the best ending isn't the one we want to write. "What do you mean?" Jude asked, frowning slightly. "The girl had to leave before she could ruin the ending," Lena explained softly. "Because sometimes stories need space to find their own way home. But she never forgot the princes who taught her to believe in magic again, or the king who showed her that broken hearts can heal." The boys were fighting sleep now, their eyes growing heavy despite their interest in the story. Lena continued until their breathing evened out. her voice growing quieter with each word. And so, one morning, the girl slipped away like mist, carrying their love with her like the most precious story of all. She knew the princes would be okay because they had their father's love, and sometimes that's the strongest magic there is. When she was sure they were asleep, Lena stood slowly. She looked down at their peaceful faces, memorizing every detail. Rowan's slightly furrowed brow, Jude's hand still stretched toward where she had been sitting. Bending down, she pressed a gentle kiss to each of their foreheads. At the door, she paused one last time. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "for helping me find my voice again." Then she stepped out, closing the door with infinite care behind her. In her room, she finished packing the last of her belongings. The letter she'd written to Damien sat heavy in her pocket, explaining everything, apologizing for leaving this way, telling him truths she'd never spoken aloud. When the house was completely silent, she placed it on the kitchen table, where he would find it in the morning. The taxi arrived before dawn. Lena took one final look at the house that had become more than just a workplace. Somewhere inside, a camera recorded her departure, but she didn't know if Damien would ever watch that footage. Morning arrived with cruel brightness. Damien entered the kitchen as usual, but stopped short at the sight of the envelope propped against the coffee pot. His name was written in Lena's flowing script. With trembling fingers, he opened it and began to read. When the twins came down for breakfast, they found their father sitting at the table, the letter crumpled slightly where he'd gripped it too hard. His face was drawn, eyes red-rimmed. "Where's Lena?" Rowan asked, looking around the unusually quiet kitchen. Damien pulled out their chairs, helping them settle in for breakfast. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things he didn't know how to explain. "Daddy?" Jude's voice was small, uncertain. "Is the girl coming back?" Damien couldn't speak. Instead, he pulled both boys into his arms, holding them close as tears he couldn't stop slid silently down his face. The morning sun streamed through the windows, warming their huddled forms, while somewhere in the distance, a car carried Lena toward her new life, leaving behind a family forever changed by the stories she'd brought into their lives. Sunshine streamed through the Hale estate windows, soap bubbles shimmering in the light. Blue and red streamers hung from the ceiling, balloons bobbed in corners, and children's laughter filled once quiet rooms. Damien arranged 5 candles on each twin's cake, chocolate for Rowan, vanilla for Jude. His hands were steady now, unlike 3 weeks ago when he'd found Lena's letter. The well-creased paper remained in his desk drawer today. Preschoolers in party hats ran through the house while parents chatted. Cecily moved among them gracefully, keeping drinks full and food plentiful, wearing a mysterious smile that appeared and vanished. "Present time," announced Jude, bouncing near the gift table with his more reserved but equally excited brother. After the twins opened their toys and art supplies, Damien presented a large package wrapped in brown paper with gold ribbon. "This one," he said meaningfully, "is from me. And a few other storytellers." Inside was a leather-bound book titled Our Story. The first page showed familiar illustrations, the Quiet King, twin princes, and Singing Moon River. Rowan traced the lines while Jude flipped pages excitedly. "It's all our stories," Jude exclaimed. Children gathered around as the twins discovered tales of healing and laughter that Damien had written with them. The room quieted as they reached the final story. Jude read aloud. The servant girl thought she had no place in the kingdom. She packed her stories and walked away, believing love means letting go. Rowan continued, but the king knew better. He searched every village for the girl who taught his sons to dream again. "Did you find her?" Jude asked. Damien looked up to see Lena standing at the back, partially hidden by a houseplant. She wore a blue dress, clutching her coat as if ready to flee. Nearby stood Cecily with her revealing smile. she'd arrange this reunion. The room fell silent as Damien approached Lena. He knelt, offering not a ring, but her pen. "Will you write the rest with me? The story isn't finished without you." Lena's hand trembled. "Are you sure?" Before Damien answered, the twins crashed into them. "Stay," said Rowan. "Please," added Jude. Lena looked at them all, then nodded, taking the pen. Guests cheered as the celebration expanded beyond birthdays. Later, when everyone had gone, the family gathered by the fireplace. The twins drew illustrations while Lena offered suggestions. Damien wrote nearby. And so the kingdom found its voice again, one page at a time. The once watchful camera sat forgotten, now capturing not silence, but laughter. The music of a family whole again. If you enjoyed the story of Damien and Lena, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.